If I'm taking away like one oar of that ship and replace it with the other, is it still the same ship? We can still say that, it's the entire ship is there, is just one oar. But at what point, like if we keep on doing that, continuing it, at what point will it become a different ship?
Which also kind of brings me to my next question. Is it divisive? Like, is having an identity in that social context, the only thing it really does is divide you from someone else, like an Indian from an American, a Hindu from a Christian, or something like that, you know what I mean? Like a black person from a white person. And the way you identify, it only creates more barriers and more walls in the world, like to quote ago, narrow domestic walls. But what I mean to say is, like, is there anything better than that, or like, does it do any good?
So one is what you think about yourself, the other is what others think about you, and finally what you truly are. Hey Curious Pure, this is Suraj here.
And I'm Pratham.
So on this channel, each episode is a random open-ended conversation about some of the topics that have intrigued or fascinated us in the past. We try to pick something that's interesting that we wondered about and bounce our thoughts off each other. This comes from the unique bit of experience that we've had through reading books or watching movies or just culture in general. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about identity. So who am I? What does it mean to be me? Or do we really know or understand us? So I think this is one of those topics that I've pretty deeply thought about. What about you?
Yeah, same. I think it's just something that you kind of come across while growing up and think, okay, when you hear those words of identity and who you are. So yeah, given it a fair bit of thought, come across random stuff from here and there.
Cool. Awesome. So I want to start this off with a very small story, and which is also kind of like a thought experiment. So have you heard of Ship of Theseus?
I think it sounds a little familiar, but go on.
Okay. So apparently this Theseus was this Greek guy, and I think he was a hero who founded Athens. So this guy, he had a ship, and he won so many wars, and he came and he parked his ship. So these people in Athens, they were protecting this ship, and because they were trying to preserve it for a really long time, what they did was they were taking away old planks which were getting decayed, and they was replacing it with the new ones and stronger and better timber in their places. So after doing this over a long period of time, like many philosophers, they started seeing this and they started thinking about identity. If I'm taking away like one oar of that ship and replace it with the other, is it still the same ship? We can still say that, it's the entire ship is there, is just one oar. But at what point, like if we keep on doing that, continuing it, at what point will it become a different ship? Or will it ever become a different ship? So this was actually the thought experiment of the Ship of Theseus, wherein like how do you determine the true identity? So yeah, let me know about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have heard of it, but I think it goes into of what do you mean when you say, is it the same ship? Are you defining it by its physical characteristics, or I don't know. It's something that I feel like it can't really be answered probably.
Okay. I mean, that makes all of us probably, but go
on. I think I would say it's probably the same ship, because I don't know, I think if you replace a few parts of it, it probably is the same. But yeah, I think to the other question, what you said, at what point does it become a new ship or a different ship? I don't know. I don't think we can come up with an answer for that. I mean, the most obvious thing that I can think of is if more than half of it is changed, then probably it's something different. Okay. But I think, like, what about the same question being applied to humans? Like, I know that we lose a lot of cells every day and every week and every month, and there's all those stats about your cells being constantly replaced. Exactly. And yet you really don't kind of lose your identity, right? You're pretty much the same person. That's a little more like maintenance, which can be said of for the ship as well, I guess. So, yeah, I think it would pretty much remain the same ship. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, before answering that, there is actually an extension to this Ship of Theseus problem. I'll tell you that. I think like many people wouldn't have heard the second part of it. So let's say we're replacing the old oars with the new ones. And let's say we're not discarding the old parts. We are accumulating all those old parts. And now, for now, we have completely replaced the ship with new parts. And now, what if we build another ship using all the old parts that we have replaced with? So, which is the actual ship of Theseus now? The one that we built from the extracted old parts of it, or the new one?
Wait, so the one that you're building now is like you've extracted all the old
Exactly.
parts. Yeah, then I would say the one that you've built now is the old ship. And the one that you replaced everything of, then I think it is a new ship and like a different one.
Okay, but at what point would you say that changed? Because when I would have replaced only one or two of those parts, the original ship's parts.
I don't know. Maybe like the main skeletal or framework of it. Probably that's when, I would have thought that, okay, now it's like something you're building a new thing entirely. You don't need to replace anymore. You could have just built a new one and that would probably take lesser effort.
Okay.
But yeah, it's an interesting question.
I actually, there is some sort of answer, and the answer that probably I'm comfortable with, and I've made peace with that answer, but I'll come to that later.
Okay, but like, let me pose this question at you. Like, from where does your sense of identity come? And, I think it kind of goes against the bigger question of who am I? So would you say it comes from your memories, from your childhood? Does it come from your past? Or, what would you use to define it? And then like, I'll kind of come to a few other points that I want to make here. But what do you think about that?
Okay, so from all the deep pondering of thoughts, I think mainly it's like majorly it is memories. Like every single memory that I've ever had, and that all those experiences that I have, I think it definitely is that. And I'm the person who believes in the quantification of our memories or brain itself. So I know that you don't buy into the idea that we can probably, if we know all the neural structures of our brain or your brain, like we can map it completely and it would become you. But I believe that, like, I think we can do that given the right technology. So I strongly feel that if another entity which could hold memories is replaced with the exact same memories that I had, I I think it would be me.
Okay. Basically the ship thing again, but like with respect to a person's memories, kind of.
Yeah. Again, the ship is like configurations, like ship is parts plus the configuration
But
of
like
those parts.
from what you're saying, it's the same thing, right? Because you said that it's if you remap it to an entirely new this thing, you say that it would be a replica of the same thing. Like it would be you.
Yeah.
So in a way, again, it is a configuration itself.
Exactly.
Okay. Because the reason I ask is like, I was trying to get at, is that all it takes to, define your identity? Because there's so much more, right? There's a parental identity, there's a national identity, there's a social identity, there's a religious identity, which is mostly not from your memories. I mean, kind of, but it's more like it's thrust upon you. You don't really get a choice in it or know about it much. You just kind of inherit that. So, yeah, like that's not really from. I mean, I wouldn't say it's really from your memories, but maybe it is of your experiences of going to temple or church or whatever, and participating in a parade or celebrating some kind of a festival or holiday. Your cultural identity, for instance.
Okay.
Or do you think that those shouldn't qualify as identity at all?
No, definitely not. See, I think when you started with the identity imposed by the country or the state or the laws of men that have made that, I think that is not for me. It's like sort of like a pseudo identity because I didn't have a choice in that. Like I was just imposed those identities on me because I just happened to be born in India or born whatever in whichever place it is. And whatever things that you told after that, like going to temples or the cultural part of it, I think it would still be a part of the memory which I already buy into.
Yeah, but again, that was also not your choice, right? You just experienced it.
So do you mean to say that okay, let's say I was forced to go to, I don't know, a temple or a parade, and because of which it kind of influenced my identity. So Are you asking, does that still count that particular experience as one?
Because as in, like, you made the point that you don't choose it, but what do you really choose as part of your identity, right? Like, what forms it is what I'm trying to say. And the interesting point about the memories part, like, I remember reading this one quote. I think it was by an Indian author. I don't recall which, but I remember it was a she, and the quote went like, "Wherever you go becomes a part of you somehow."
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it kind of plays into the whole memories, childhood, your experiences growing up, and because, like, see, for example, right now you're living in a certain city, and maybe you've lived there all your life, and if you go to somewhere else, and start living there, you do get homesick. That place that you call a home, you identify with it, and you feel like you belong there. You want to kind of go back there, or you feel like that's where your identity is in a way. I'm not sure if you feel that way, but I'm just saying that, like, actually suddenly I thought of those lyrics from that song Runaway by Aurora. Take me home where I belong.
Okay.
And so it kind of, like, at least that lyric, it makes me think whether, I mean, we're going off on a tangent here, but, like, it makes me think, whether that whole thing about taking on an identity, does it just come from a fear of not being defined? Where you kind of define yourself with, okay, this is who I am, this is what my name is, this is where I come from, this is where I grew up. And if there was none of that, like, what are you? What would you use to define yourself? And that fear of not holding on to something, not having something to express yourself with or define yourself with, that fear of, not having that secure place kind of makes you call whatever or wherever you came from home. And you feel a sense of comfort there because things are so familiar that it really feels like it's a part of you, which kind of takes me back to that quote. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, when you were describing all this, I was thinking about if something is imposed on us, like something like the birthplace, like I was born in this city, so I probably have some special preference or bias towards this city. But it was not really my choice, but maybe I still identify it with it. So, is it really our identity? I think even though it's not our choice, because it is inevitably imposed on us,
Experience.
it definitely is seeded into our memory and hence becomes our identity. Going deeper into that, like I was thinking, okay, let's say in an hypothetical situation where all this wasn't there, actually not even hypothetical. If we go back for a long period, like thousands of years back, we didn't have countries, so we didn't have borders or caste or all these things. Let's say we were cavemen. Maybe we would be identified just by the tribe, and that probably would be the only thing. And let's say if you strip away even that, you're like somehow got lost and you're the lone tribesman. You don't have anything to associate with. And if those people were travelers, like they wouldn't stick to one place because agriculture wasn't developed yet. They were just hunters. So I was thinking, what would be their sense of identity? I'm trying to be that person and trying to think how I would
What would you
introduce
use?
how I would introduce myself as to another being given a chance. Like, what would I say about me? I think it's still just a collection of my experiences, whatever I've seen throughout the years.
Yeah, that's what I mean to say, right? There's not much over there. So if you don't take on these things as your identity, really what is you besides a collection of your experiences? Because, like, for example, the situation you spoke of, you would have a tribal identity, or from where you started off, or something, where you were born, maybe that place you would kind of be able to describe. Maybe you would go back to that or try to look for it again in your adulthood, since you are hunter-gatherer and moving all the time, through the seasons and through the years and everything. But you would have a name. There would be a sound that they would call you with, and maybe you would use that as your, identification. I mean, this is again, like, in terms of a social context, right? That to differentiate between person A and person B, you have a sound that you make, and everybody knows who is being referred to.
Yeah.
And even though there's that thing about, whether a name really matters, as long as you're able to identify, like, to quote from Shakespeare, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet."
Oh, I've definitely heard that.
Yeah, so I mean, it always makes me think that, does it really matter what one person's name is or what we name something? But there's an interesting thing I came across here, which is only specific to the Eastern cultures, I think. I'm not sure where I came across it, but from some video or something, I learned that, I never realized this before, but if you look at most cultures around the world, their names either mean nothing or it's some reference to some religious personality or entity from the stories or something. But specifically, I think it's specific to India, that the names always mean, like a lot of names, the majority of them are adjectives. They mean some quality or something. And the reason they name people that way is because that the word that you'll hear the most throughout your life, most likely, is your name. And so the idea is, by listening to that again, that quality kind of imbibes itself in you. Yeah. So, if somebody's name meant brave, you keep hearing that again and again all throughout your life, and or if someone's name meant very calm and very tranquil. But, like the same, what about the names of things? Does it really apply to that? And again, like, when I was kind of thinking about that and checking that out, I came across this thing about Sanskrit language, and not that I'm any kind of expert in it or something, but apparently they name things based on the kind of feeling or vibe you get from that. Like, for example, the word for water or the word for bliss. In this case, I think it's Anand. So the sound that you make to refer to it and what you hear or what it produces in your body, based on that, they name it. It's not just like a random word or historical or, like not like there is some science behind it. And since I didn't know much of what it could mean or didn't realize it at the time, I kind of equated it to that resonant frequency concept that we learn in physics, where each object has a resonant frequency at which, if you start cause its vibration, it'll amplify like crazy. And I don't know, it's I think we went off into like a crazy tangent there, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, although I kind of knew it because we as Indians would keep hearing those names, and I think at most of the times we would know what it means. I'd never really thought about that, like compared it with other names which had only like historical references or doesn't mean anything at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really damn interesting. So this kind of reminds me about a quote I had heard long back, which is about identity, and like it kind of has three forms that it takes. So one is if you're talking about yourself. So one is what you think about yourself. The other is what others think about you, and finally what you truly are. And I think like that what you truly are, that part is, it's kind of subjective. Like, whom are you asking that? If you're asking any other person except the person that you're defining, it would be the second part, which is what others think about you. If you're asking the person that you're referring to, it would be what he thinks about himself.
I don't know, like I always thought that is more personality than identity, but now you made me think in that direction.
Wait, so do you see those two as a divergent characteristic?
I would say the second question, what you asked, is more like personality, and maybe the third one, what we truly are, kind of to be a little more closer to identity. But again, that could have different nuances, right? Because like I always feel like all people, the core is the same, like human consciousness and humans are the same, but it's just that the outer shell or like the flavor or color of life that you've taken on based on your experiences, based on where you were born, and your the experiences that you surround yourself with, your past and your memories and everything, that kind of forms the shell which makes each of us differ from each other. But what we truly are, if I had to kind of define that, I would say it's something which is similar for everyone. Like the core structure is the same. The fundamental skeleton of human consciousness and human body and everything is the same. It's just that what we form as a psychological reality, we start assuming is the existential reality. Like it's the only reality we start assuming, and then we try to think that, okay, like everyone has a different truth to them, which I don't know, it doesn't sound right to me.
But see, you yourself told that we have some core, say, system which is common among all of us, and there's another layer of maybe personality or whatever it is that you want to call that defines the person. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. Not defines the person, but that's what I would say is the what others think of you, kind of, that answers that question.
Okay. Actually, that brings, I just thought about this question now because you mentioned this. Let's say a person thinks about himself as, say, calm or whatever, like anything. Now, let's say a huge bunch of people other than himself think something differently about that person, but those huge number of people, they all agree on the same characteristic, like he is that kind of person, but that actual person is not does not think that he is that person. So what is the true identity? Is it the one that everyone else thinks that he is, or the one that he thinks that he is, which is different from both?
But I would say, like, characteristics, I don't know if I qualify them as identity, but it's interesting. I mean, I'm actually thinking about it, and I feel like maybe kind of actions speak louder than words, and what you actually do is how you seem to people. So if it's a characteristic, I feel like third person observers are better judges of that, instead of the kind of things that you can make yourself believe about you or anybody else. But let me ask you, something else over here. Like, can one live without an identity? I want to kind of go into that. Like, do you really need to identify with anything at all? And again, I'm asking in the context of all these things that I mentioned, right? Like, we spoke about the identity, the first basic identity of having a name, and then your larger social identity and familial identity and national identity and stuff. Like, can we live without that, or do you feel like it's kind of like a safety, security cover to have for a person? And without that, like, let's say you were born and you had nothing to define you. You just woke up one day and you were on an island and there was literally like nothing, or not even an island, just some random place. And there was nothing that really distinguished you from others, or or we didn't make note of those things, Would that be fine, or would that person be super like lost in life in the beginning, at least? Like, there's nothing defining you. It almost feels like a fear of unknown kind of a thing. So what do you think about that? Do we need an identity, or can one live without an identity?
Okay, so I would say in this day and age, we definitely need an identity, I guess, because I think over the years we've evolved to be a social animal. Like, we kind of have to mingle in order to survive, and if you are among other people, we definitely would have identities. So yes, but I'm trying to imagine a world like, just like you said, where there's no identity and like you just randomly wake up and there's nothing to identify yourself with. I'm seeing how that would play out. It definitely feels like some sci-fi movie.
Exactly right. It's interesting to see the consequences. But I actually kind of found it interesting that you said in this day and age, because really I feel like it's something that really doesn't matter whether it's this day and age or not, right? And okay, again, if we go back to that, you said man is a social animal, so that's what I'm trying to ask. Like, what is the significance of your identity? Is it beyond a social context, or is it just to make things easier? Like, for example, you have an age, you have a name, you have all those other details that identify you, that tell us, okay, this is the person that we're referring to. But that's just to help the social context, right? It's more to be able to identify who has gotten vaccinated and who hasn't, or where is this person from, like other things like that help us manage the world better. But in terms of an existential reality, like, what do you really think is the significance of having an identity beyond a social context, or is there one?
Don't you think, to answer that, like, we kind of have to truly understand what identity means? Because when I'm trying to strip down all these identities that we have inevitably inherited, I'm again going back to those
But
caveman
exactly,
ages.
right? So that's what I'm saying, right? Like, I feel like in answering these questions itself, we'll be answering what is identity, because we can't really put a finger on it so.
Okay, so what's your thought on caveman? Let's go back to him. He doesn't have any social construct, at least not yet. Like, they're wandering off in the wild. They're hunters. Like, they move every single day.
Yeah, I actually feel, honestly, the answer to both, like, that's why I said I don't think it's this day and age. I honestly feel that it really doesn't have any value beyond social context. Like, if other than that you asked me to identify myself, I really wouldn't have much to say. And that's why I feel like the core structure of humans is the same across people. And I don't mean just the physical structure. Like, this psychological reality that we take on, and the thoughts and emotions and everything we think of every day, is really more like a psychological thing. But other than that, like, all humans are the same. Like, for example, that person who, gets into a plane and makes it crash and gives up his life for some cause, he's identified with a particular cause and a particular nation, a particular religion or something. And that's why he's so keen to defend his identity from something else or fight against another identity. But beyond that, like if you and me were born in that age and day and had those experiences and had those influences and that education, what is taught to those kind of folks, we would pretty much feel, if we were genuine enough and had that much integrity, we'd probably do the same thing. So you get what I mean? Like I'm saying that action is defined by the identity, and that identity is something taken on. It's not something you're born with. And beyond that, I don't think there is any identity. Which also kind of brings me to my next question. Is it divisive? Like, is having an identity in that social context, the only thing it really does is divide you from someone else, like an Indian from an American, a Hindu from a Christian, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like a black person from a white person. And the way you identify, it only creates more barriers and more walls in the world. Like, to quote Tagore, narrow domestic walls. But what I mean to say is, like, is there anything better than that? Or, like, does it do any good?
Oh, man. You directly poked into my view about, basically about identity. So I've thought about this, like, with borders, it separates us. Language, again, separates us. Caste, like, all these things. All those
Right.
are the separators. But even I wanted to see, okay, I mean, apart from giving us a sense of belonging with the people who share the same identity, like what else does it provide on top of that?
Yeah, I think that's one place where we agree, probably, out of all things.
Yeah.
And funnily, in my mind, I actually thought of, like, just now, like, I suddenly thought of, does an animal have an identity? Because all this social context is probably not there, right?
I still think it kind of does, because have you seen that great science debate where Richard Dawkins tells about that cuckoo's nest?
Yep. And I think if anyone's really interested in these kind of things, go check out the Great Science Debate on YouTube. And it's really fun, especially where Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins are speaking. At least my favorite parts, and I think Suraj would agree.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, so the example that Richard Dawkins gives, and even without the complexities of that cuckoos, like how it chooses where to lay the eggs, I think animals still have some.
No, but we're talking on an individual level, right? Not like a species identity.
No. I am talking about individual identity itself. Like they still go back to the same nest that they had started with, and like even if you think about a lion, like they hunt, they gather food and come to its own son or daughter.
That's fine. So again, it kind of comes back to the memory question. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I think we kind of drifted off in between over there. So I wanted to ask you about the same caveman thing. But when you told that when we are stripped down from all the identities that we have inherited, there's nothing much. But don't you consider the experiences that the caveman would have gained over the years, like has kind of defined his identity, and the behavior that he showed for those experiences that has defined its identity? Don't you think it is of some value to him at least?
Yeah, for sure it's of some value, but like, what I was trying to say is, at least in my opinion, so I feel like the identity goes beyond the shell, but the memories just form the shell. That's what I'm trying to say. Like the identity, if someone were to ask me, like, what is the identity, I feel like there's no more meaning beyond what we spoke about. But the core I'm referring to is beyond that. Like it's beyond the memories. The memories are just the shell and the kind of life you've taken on. But beyond that, the core identity is just human, which is same to everyone. I mean, that's what I would say.
Okay. So whatever you're defining it as core, like, don't you think it's just our DNA that you're talking about? Because
like the human consciousness.
Yeah. So basically our hardware, like we are all encoded with at least some amount of common DNA, which makes us.
Yeah, like the hardware and the electricity, the life force, what I mean.
Okay, so I have another thought experiment. It's kind of similar to Ship of Theseus, but with humans. So let's say we both are in a hospital, and like there's been an experiment conducted on us where a doctor removes one brain cell from my brain and replaces that with yours. And he keeps on doing that. You get where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think there is any point in which, like, I start becoming you and you start becoming me?
I don't know. Honestly, actually, like when you spoke about the brain thing,
Mm-hmm.
also, like for me, I don't. The reason I don't agree with that, if you could remap the exact neurological structure and you would create a brain, I don't agree with that. Is because I feel like the complexity of what is happening there is beyond the physical. I don't feel. I mean, I don't think that it's only the physical characteristics that's defining what's happening there. I feel like it's a little more than that, because if by studying the physical characteristics we would have been able to figure it out, I think by now we kind of would have. Maybe I'm wrong about that part, but that's the reason I feel that it's not entirely just about physical. So I don't think that that would happen. I don't think that you would become me or I would become you.
Mm-hmm.
But because I think, yeah, I don't think it's only that the fact that I feel like that's more like just the framework. It's not really what is holding what is you or what is me. But I don't know if it is those memories. Then, like I said, if the core is the same, and if you take your shell and you know put it in my body, then I guess it would mean that I would become you, or I would start thinking like you, or have your memories and stuff. So yeah, I
Okay.
guess that's a question that probably can't be answered.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, I believe that we can do that. I mean, given the technology, like, I don't think we are there yet because it's incredibly complex to map it. But just because we are not there yet, I don't think uh, we won't be do it. We won't be able to do it ever. But yeah, what I wanted to know was, do you also think that if we just think about us, like, if we think that it's me who's thinking about me, if you start thinking about it deeply, some people don't realize that. I mean, okay, if you ask many people, where is your skeleton? Like, they will say it's inside of me, but actually, it's outside of you. All this arm, your flesh, your skeleton, even your skull, it's just protecting you, which is inside, which is actually the brain. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, and yeah, actually, it is. It is. I mean, it is one way we could take the identity perspective. It is just an extension that you gather as you're growing up. Like when you were born, you didn't have the body parts. I mean, you did, but it wasn't like as grown and you didn't weigh this much. So is there a you that is really separate from the body? And I think, yeah, there is. That's why I feel like it's not just physical. You get what I mean? That consciousness, it's not some switch that goes on when you arrange all these cells in the way it's arranged in our brain. I don't think that's what's happening there. It's a
Okay.
part of it, but it's not like, okay, if I arrange all these things in this way in the lab, suddenly the switch of consciousness will turn on. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's what there is. That's why I mean that, like what you said, right? You are actually going to that conclusion itself. If you say it's just an extension, it's my body and my arms and my legs, it's not really me, then what is you?
Mm,
So what I mean to say is, like, where do you draw the line, right? If you're saying, okay, this is just my arm and this is just my hair and this is just my legs, where do you draw the line of what is only supposed to be some kind of a static, mechanical thing? So why not go all the way to your brain as well? Even that is just a physical thing, right? It may not really be you. What part of you is actually you is your consciousness. And the rest is just your physical body that is needed to, continue with your day-to-day life. Like, the manifestation of all your actions has to be physical, but what is you is your consciousness, which I feel is beyond the physical, at least from what, I don't know, some instinct and some reading and some trying to make sense of it.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel that this is the part where I don't agree with you, because we still see, we know so much about the brain, and we can kind of map those functions, like whatever we experience, or like whatever inputs we get and whatever outputs we do, we can kind of map it, and we are not there yet, definitely, but we can, I believe that we can map it completely. But regarding a question on where do we draw the line, I feel that that line is drawn where our brain is. We can actually think of this as another thought experiment where I remove just my brain and I put it inside your skull. Now, although I have the outer body of Pratham, it's still me. It's still Suraj who is inside the skull of Pratham. That's why I feel the identity is limited to brain. But if I try to reduce the radius of the line that I draw and chop off up just a tiny part of my brain, and then say, because you were saying that even brain is physical and there is something more than just the brain which defines us. Like I'll try to chop off just a small part of my brain, then maybe my memory or my speech or whatever it is, that part of it goes. I don't think I would be me, because I lose a tiny part of my memory. And if we are buying into the idea that like we are made out of memories that we've accumulated over the years, yeah, I think the brain is where I draw the line. And I have seen, before you say, like, I saw this documentary where there was this person who had met with an accident and some part of his brain was injured, and he had forgotten every single thing. Like he actually had a wife, he had a, I don't know, son or a daughter, and he didn't know anything about it. He didn't know about his school, parents, nothing. He didn't know his job. Like I think he was an electrical engineer or something. Like he couldn't remember any of those. And later when he was told about all those things, like he was surprised that he even had that knowledge. So when I was just seeing him and seeing how he answers those questions, so I think after the accident, when he woke up in that hospital, it was exactly like what you described earlier, where let's say you wake up in a entirely different strange land, like there's no borders, no religion, nothing, zero. And how do you identify yourself? And that's when I started thinking more about memories. So I just wanted to tie another aspect of it to memories. So this was one such example.
Yeah, for sure, that is something to think about. But don't you think, again, like, okay, so let's say if there is a part of your identity that goes beyond the social context, then it would, because again here when you're saying he had a child and a wife and everything, it again relates to the larger world, right? Your position in it, your situation in it and stuff. And but yeah, I think we can't really answer if it falls beyond that context. But let me actually kind of give something away from that context, like not the social context and not your everyday life and stuff. And I think I want to quote this from a poem of Walt Whitman. I'm just going to read it out because it's a little long. So it goes something like, "O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these, O me, O life? The answer, that you are here, that life exists, an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse." And I think that's also there in that movie Dead Poet Society again. And he reads out this, he says this out, and then he looks at one of the students and he's like, "What will your verse be?"
Whoa.
What I wanted to highlight is, here he's talking of an identity in terms of the human race, right? And the powerful play goes on is like the history of all things we do as people, as humanity goes on, and what can you contribute to it? Like what you as an identity or an entity can do that will contribute to that, or that will take it in a different direction. What verse would you write? And that also kind of brings me to a question I had, like, could we in the future have a planetary identity that we would think in terms of I hail from Earth, or that's where I come from?
Then that line, the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. I actually am rethinking about that word may. It's not that he didn't say that we should or we must or anything like that. We have the opportunity to contribute a verse. And what verse would it be? What verse would I do it personally? That's a really deep thought for, I would say, for our life.
Yeah.
As what we leave behind. And regarding that planetary identity, if we ever be a spacefaring civilization, or if we ever encounter an alien life, would we dawn upon ourselves the identity of Earthlings that we do not know? Then, yeah, I think definitely. Because I think even there, it kind of creates a border between Earth and, let's say, we discover Martians, and so it is Mars. We definitely would acquire a new identity, just like we have when borders were made.
Mm.
So yeah, I would definitely think so.
Yeah, I think Earthlings for sure, but still, again, it's just an extension of our geographic identities now in terms of on the planet to from which planet. But the reason I kind of brought in the poem is because it kind of teaches you to think in terms of the identity of humanity and not any other identity. That as humans, what we're capable of, what our consciousness is capable of, and what we can do. And maybe being identified with that is, sufficient and necessary. But yeah, I think basically for me, the identity is only useful, or like we discussed, how it does it do any good, or is it mostly just for usefulness of running society? So for me, it's like when your identity is cosmic, or in other words, you identify with everything, or in other words, when you don't identify with anything at all. Because you see how your identity is, it almost like divides, right? See, when I say me, this is basically my body and that is your body, or it's different from, it basically is kind of defining a boundary, like all physical things do. And so when you say your identity is Indian, it's basically the border of India. And so if you take on a cosmic identity, that is, you identify with each and everything, in other words, you're not really identifying with anything at all. You feel everything is kind of like yourself, so it will prevent conflict also. And that's what is traditionally thought of as gaining the ultimate enlightenment, where you've kind of become one with everything. I don't know how much you will relate to that, but I can actually kind of try to put it in this one quote that I read, and it went like, it's actually quite opposite to what we've been discussing, in the way of, we were discussing how you come from a certain place and you would identify yourself that way. And even in terms of the caveman example that you brought in, right? It was like, okay, at least you started off in this place and you would have a name, and, but with respect to that place thing, the quote goes like this: if I ever found a place that I belong, that in itself would be an identity crisis for me. So what it's trying to say is, if I found like a home or like a place that I belong to, I would consider that as an identity crisis, because I want to be everywhere or travel everywhere and connect to everything and relate to everything. And for me, that's what I would try to conclude this with, that, a cosmic identity or no identity itself is a more liberating thought and a better experience of life. What do you think?
For sure. I think it was Einstein who told, like, maybe now we are fighting over all these religions and caste and all the things that we have made up for ourselves. But in the end, we would have a cosmic religion. And I think that would be the ultimatum. And yeah, I think whatever you said definitely resonates with that.
Yeah, I think that's what finally matters to me. I think like the significance of the whole of the topic we're discussing on identity finally comes down to a kind of cosmic identity if we look outside of that social context. Yeah, I think we started off with that ship of Theseus and we spoke about so many different things and finally arrived at like a cosmic identity.
So true. And I think even for me, like, this was, of all the episodes that we've done, I think this is one of the most intriguing of them all. Especially when we discussed about stripping down all the identities that we have inevitably inherited due to social or political constructs. Like, what are we left with then? Like, do we still have some identity, if any? And then finally, how having no identity or relating with everything or everyone is kind of becoming like the cosmic identity. So that definitely was very, like, extremely thought-provoking for me.
Yeah, cool. Same for me as well.
So on that note, we'll end it here, and feel free to leave your thoughts and comments down below if you're on YouTube. If you're listening to us on other platforms like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, you can definitely reach out to us on Instagram at Curiosphere. So thanks for tuning in and have a good one.